the past few months, America has become pretty strict about who is allowed to be honored with a statue. Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis statues have disappeared across the South. Teddy Roosevelt and Christopher Columbus are under siege in New York City. Thomas Jefferson under attack at the University of Virginia, the school he founded. But in some cities, they're putting up statues instead of tearing them down. Washington, D.C. is one of them. The city council here is planning to erect a Marion Barry statue. That's the same Marion Barry who once said Asians, quote, have dirty shops, need to get out of the city. The same Barry once caught smoking crack on camera in 1990 at the Vista Hotel. Garland Nixon is a radio show host, been around D.C. a long time. He thinks it's a great idea. Mr. Nixon, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
So I'll just admit it flat out. I knew Barry at dinner at my house. I thought he was a charming guy, interesting guy. I mean, I like Marion Barry, actually. Yeah. Worst mayor probably in the country, but also kind of like an open bigot, and would just sort of say it. I mean, in 2014, he said, and I'm quoting, "We got to do something about these Asians coming in, opening up businesses, those dirty shops, they ought to go." I wonder if you put up a Marion Barry statue, what Asian people driving by would think.
Well, there's a couple things. If you recall, though, that he was brought to task about that, and he discussed it, and he talked about the issue there was in the black community that a lot of black people didn't own. Yeah,
but he's still attacking a racial group.
And he came back and he apologized.
Are we allowed to do that? I mean, that's your. Come on, you can't do that. When he got reelected, I was living here when he did, and in 1994, he said famously, white people get over it. Like, you can't. Come on now. He was a divisive figure on racial lines, and why would you ever want a statue of him?
I don't think he was a divisive figure on racial lines. He was the mayor at a time when there were a lot of divisive issues going on. But let's not forget. Let's not just bottle this guy up based on a couple of statements that he made. Here was a guy who was the president of the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the first president of SNCC. He was a guy, and you know what he did when he became the president of SNCC? You know what he did? He had a master's degree in chemistry, and he was working on his PhD in organic chemistry, and he quit that in order to work for SNCC.
He was a smart guy. I mean,
right, he was a brilliant guy.
You're absolutely right, but he
worked.
wrecked the city. I mean, 100,000 people left Washington while he was mayor. While he was mayor, 41% of all African-American men were either in jail, out on bail, or wanted. Total in the city. That's not a good outcome. That's not impressive. He did not make the city better. You know that. You lived here. Why would you ever put a statue to that guy?
Let's not forget that when he came in, the city was a mess. When he came in as mayor, the first 3 years that he came in, they had a $13 million surplus. When he came in, actually, if you look at the numbers, and you can look it up online, when he came in, he straightened the city out. Now, what happened in the 80s and the crack epidemic of the 80s was not the fault of Marion Barry.
But he was a crackhead himself. I mean, he got busted smoking crack on camera. Then he got busted again, as you know.
Yes, he did.
Using drugs. Look, there are a lot of decent people who fall into drug addiction, but he was a crack smoker at the height of the crack epidemic. I mean, that's the definition of bad leadership.
He was a man who did get in trouble, but all of the things that he did were things that damaged him. He did a number of good things for the city and the people in the city of Washington.
He went to jail and got busted for having sex with a woman in the visiting room. He couldn't even spend 6 months in jail without getting in trouble.
As I said, the things that he did were things that hurt him. But additionally, he put together a program where all young children in Washington, or all school-age people in Washington, D.C. who wanted a summer job would have a summer job. When he came in, African Americans were getting none of the contracts from the city, and he said they've got to get at least 30.
So do you think it's meaningful that 41% of all black men in the entire District of Columbia were in jail, on parole, or wanted by the police in the city run by Marion Barry? You can't say it was racial animus. He was running the city.
Right, but we can't say it was his fault.
You can't look at that and say, look, he advanced the cause of African Americans when 100,000 people left, a lot of them black. The black middle class left the city and went to Maryland.
You know what's interesting about that? So when he came in, he said he was going to build a black middle class, and in fact he did. But one of the consequences of him building a black middle class...
No, he didn't. The federal government built the middle class.
One of the consequences of what he did was there are a lot of black middle-class people who lived in poor neighborhoods in the city, and when they started making more money, they moved out to the county and bought nice homes. So the fact that a lot of black people left the city wasn't because it was worse.
Well, that's not true. The schools were
well.
terrible, and no normal person with an option would ever keep his kids here. I mean, look, by basic measures, the city got worse. That's just true. Look, I think Barry was a complicated guy, an interesting guy. But for Washington, he wasn't good, and nobody really thinks that. Let me ask you this, though, since we're now evaluating everybody by our current standards. Barry was the only member of the city council to come out against gay marriage.
Right.
You're okay with that?
Well, let's not forget, back then, when we talk about long ago, look what happened. Barack Obama, a guy who started off. The Clintons way back signed
No, you don't. Wait, no, but hold on. You don't know the rules.
No,
the
my
rules
point,
are that you evaluate historic figures on the basis of your current moral values.
My point is, at the time he did it, that wasn't all unusual. And actually, afterwards, he said he said that if a bill came down and he was mayor, that he would sign it.
Okay, but by that standard, then none of the historical figures whose statues are being pulled down should be held to modern standards.
Well, it depends on what it
what do you mean it depends on? Look, this is insane.
No, it's not. Oh, so here's a guy who was with the student nonviolent coordinating committee, right? And it sounds like you're getting at, you know, the Robert E. Lee statues. Well, I don't think you can compare him with people who took up arms against the United States, unless we're going to give Bo Bergdahl a statue.
I'm just saying that you and I both know the truth, which is the only reason you would put Marion Barry's statue up is to give the finger to certain people in the city who hated him because he hated them and said so out loud. This guy was an open race baiter, and I'm not sure why we're giving him a pass on that. Again, I liked him. He had dinner at my house. But I'm just being honest.
Right.
He divided this city by race. You know that he did. And that's his chief appeal. Why would we want to keep doing that?
So I would argue that he didn't divide the city by race. I would argue that he came in at a time in America where the nation was divided by race, and he did everything that he could to bring it together.
Oh, really? Well, so when you say we've got to do something about these Asians coming in, they're dirty shops, they ought to go. Is that bringing us together based on race?
My point is, you cannot evaluate the man based on a single statement that he walked back later and apologized for.
How about white people get over it?
Well, there's nothing wrong with saying that. If he felt as though white people were freaked out because there was a black mayor, there's nothing wrong with
generalizing? Really? Come on, that's insane. You can't generalize on the basis of race, because that's inherently divisive, because not everyone who looks the same has the same opinions.
But you can't divide a man. I mean, you can't take a man who lived 80 years old, who was a principal figure in the civil rights movement, and say, well, he made two statements, so we got to drop all of the rest of the stuff that he did.
He made a lot more than two. The bitch set me up, for example. Look, if they put the Barry statue up, do you mind if I cover it with a sheet just so my sensibilities aren't offended?
I got a problem with that. But, you know, if you can get away with it, good luck.
I can't.
The Metro Police might grab you. But,
yeah, I think they would.
Garland
Nixon, thank you for joining us.